So, big welcome to everyone who's joining us here today. My name is Ashlyn Lavin. I am USI's STAND Engagement Coordinator. I am absolutely delighted to be your host for the next hour. Now, before we begin, I would like to go over just a few housekeeping bits so that everything runs smoothly. We do only have a short time together today, and there's so much to learn from the unique perspectives that each of our panelists brings to understanding the causes of and solutions to global period poverty. So I would ask that everyone stays muted through the panel discussion. I have no doubt that there will be some great questions from our audience, and I really encourage you to drop them into the chat at any time, whenever they come up for you. Our moderator, who I'm going to introduce in a few moments, will be able to incorporate a few of those questions into the Q&A portion of the session. So don't worry, we will have time to address them. Please do keep in mind that anything to do with periods and sexual and reproductive health can be an uncomfortable and divisive subject. So while this is something that we would like to change, I would just remind you to treat each other with the openness and respect that this discussion deserves. So also, if anyone runs into any tech issues, just drop a message in the chat and I will do my best to quickly resolve them. Right, so I would like to take a moment here now to acknowledge that this panel discussion would not be possible without the support of our funders, Irish Aid. So thank you so much for your continued support of STAND. We would also be remiss if we did not acknowledge the partnership between STAND, which is the Global Citizenship Education Program of SUS Educational Development, and the Union of Students in Ireland. Together, we are the 10,000 Students Initiative. Our partnership is focused on using awareness-raising campaigns to challenge third-level students across Ireland to take action for a better world. And so STAND and USI, as the 10,000 Students Initiative, ask you to join us today to #FreeTheFlow. If you have been following the campaign over the last 2 weeks, you will have learned a little bit already about the many different ways in which period poverty affects women and menstruators all around the world. No country is exempt from this. We are so very lucky to have with us today experts from around the world who have been working to address period poverty according to the many different compounding factors that make this such a challenging and critical issue to resolve. I would like to introduce you now to the moderator for this panel, USI's Vice President for Equality, Buki Adebowale, who's going to tell you a bit more about our panelists. Now, Buki holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Biological and Biomedical Sciences from Maynooth University. She has served as a Science and Engineering Faculty Assembly member, Bioscience Academic Representative and sabbatical position as the first Vice President of Student Life at Maynooth Students Union. Buki was the first Black woman to be elected to the executive teams of both Maynooth Students Union and the Union of Students in Ireland. She has a flair for various interests from student rights to addressing the barriers facing students of color, and of course, student engagement and active citizenship. Thank you so much for moderating this panel for us today, Buki, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Ashlyn, and welcome everyone to this amazing panel. I'm so excited to be here. And I'm really excited to get the opportunity to introduce the incredible panel of speakers that we have here today on such a huge and important topic. So I'm going to be moderating today's panel. That means I'll be introducing everyone who's speaking, asking all the questions, and also taking in your questions in the chat box if you'd like to ask any. So for our speakers, just briefly, I'll be introducing you all, and I'll do this little thing that I normally do in panels, that when your time is more or less up in terms of speaking, I'll raise my hand like this. It's a little small kind of signal, so you know when you have about 10 seconds left. But with that being said, I'm going to introduce each person individually, and I'll allow them to kind of speak a bit about what they do for 5 minutes, and I'll move on to the next person. So first, we have today Abby O'Callaghan Platt, who works as a campaign manager for the environmental NGO Voice Ireland, where she manages the No Plastic Period campaign, the Sustainable Communities Programme, the Zero Waste Communities Programme, and the Ditch the Disposables workshops. So these are amazing initiatives that Abby O'Callaghan Platt manages. But without further ado, I'm going to allow Abby to introduce herself to you all so that you can get to know them.
Hi everyone, my name's Abby. So I work for the environmental NGO called Voice Ireland. We work on sustainability issues across the country on a community level, on a school level, on a university level, and also on a policy level. I suppose I came into this topic a few years ago when we were working on plastic use. We were speaking with teenagers and households about their plastic use, and one of the areas that we asked about was menstrual products. So, and what we found was that very few people were actually using any form of reusable menstrual products. And as an environmental NGO, this would be an area of concern to us. So out of that, we developed our No Plastic Period campaign. And through research on this, we saw the intersections between the environmental impacts of menstrual products and the economic impacts. There's this brilliant report by an environmental NGO called ReZero, which is based out of Catalonia, released in 2019, looking at the environmental and economic impacts of menstrual products across the whole EU. And from that, it really does this amazing summary of the different costs involved and how period poverty can be alleviated through the use of reusable menstrual items. And so for us, when we're talking to people about reusable menstrual items, we're looking at it not only from the perspective, primarily from the perspective, of course, as the environmental perspective, because that's the lens we view things through, but also from an economic perspective. So yeah, so that's the so through our campaign, we're aimed to raise awareness and normalize the use of reusable menstrual items from the perspective of tackling environmental issues, but also from the perspective of tackling period poverty issues. So, thank you. Sorry, it's frozen. Am I supposed to? Oh, sorry. Okay.
Don't stress it. Tech issues all the time. Thank you so much for that, Abby, and that's great to hear. There's so much in that as well. So I'm going to briefly introduce our next speaker, Lama Naja, who is a gender and inclusion specialist at Plan International Lebanon. She has more than 12 years of experience in the areas of gender equality, women economic empowerment, as well as GBV and SRHR programming. So without further ado, Lama Naja, I'm going to let you speak and introduce yourself and the work that you do.
So hi everyone, and thank you for your introduction. As you previously said, I'm currently serving as a gender and inclusion specialist at Plan International Lebanon. Honestly, our office was established back in 2017, and period poverty has been one of the main topics we are working on, in addition to other issues related to SRHR. The current situation in Lebanon is really bad. The deteriorating economic situation in the country has affected girls and women in particular, especially those in underprivileged areas, which is mainly due to the increase in prices of menstrual pads and other hygiene items, without any control or subsidies from the government. The increase in prices is really shocking. It varied between 98 and 409% for the menstrual hygiene products. A high percentage of women and girls are being unable to afford to buy menstrual pads and resort to unsanitary and potentially dangerous methods of coping with their periods. According to one of the assessments that was led by Plan International back in April 2020, results showed that 66% of the girls living in Lebanon cannot afford to buy sanitary pads, and other related products. The problem is also exacerbated by a fear of stigma from speaking out and demanding the needs and rights of girls and women, as the topic is still considered a taboo. So our main work is focusing not only on delivering or distributing sanitary pads items, but also by start introducing the reusable sanitary pads and the menstrual cups, which was piloted, I believe, 5 months ago. So menstrual cups are not really something to consider in our conservative societies. And even the most cultured or educated women and girls weren't aware about menstrual cups. And the other problem that we are facing when resorting to use the reusable pads is that we cannot guarantee that the women and girls have the access to clean water. So that's another layer of challenge that we are currently facing. Over.
Thank you so much, Lama, for your introduction and like really insightful piece of information on some of the work that you do. So I'm excited to get into the questioning, but I'm going to continue to introduce the rest of our panel. So up next, we have two actually in one, but we'll kind of go in order. And I'll start off with Aisha Akorede, who is the founder of Recrowned Ireland, which was founded in April 2019 to support women and help them feel confident and comfortable and aware. So her aim is to positively impact the lives of women in Ireland and to make Recrowned Ireland an international organisation. And along Aisha, we have Miriam Yabo, who is a member of Recrowned Ireland, the team, and working to ensure that all campaigns take a United Nations Sustainable Development Goals into account. And most recently, she's contributed to Recrowned Ireland's menstrual poverty campaign with sustainable and long-term solutions. So I'm going to allow Aisha and Miriam to introduce themselves from Recrowned Ireland. So we will start off with Aisha and then Miriam.
Hi. So basically, thank you so much for the warm introduction. So Recrowned Ireland is a women's empowerment social initiative. And as you said, Bucky, our goal is to allow women in Ireland to feel comfortable, confident, and aware. So basically, we've done a lot of campaigns in the past and we've raised awareness on so many different social issues, particularly social issues to do with sexual violence. But we decided that we wanted to do something different and we wanted to do a campaign on period poverty, but we didn't know how to go about it. So when we got the opportunity to be given a scholarship by stand.ie for the Ideas Collective, it was just literally exactly what we needed at the perfect time. And basically we just literally dived right into learning about period poverty and seeing how we can positively impact those who menstruate in Ireland in general. Because one thing about menstrual poverty that we have noticed as we were doing our Ideas Collective program was that it's usually only women that are spoken about. And that's one barrier that does need to be crossed, because it's not just the so-called conservative version of a woman that's menstruates. You get me? Like, I'm just imagining if I was a trans man who was given female at birth and every single month I must be reminded that I was given female at birth, even though that is not where I want to be. And every single month I have to go out, buy pads and do all of these things that remind me that I am a woman. And it's just too difficult. And then there's so many other different people that we need to include in the conversation. And we're all about inclusion. And I'm sure everyone here is about inclusion too. And then secondly, when we were doing the Ideas Collective, one thing that we really learned was that where there's a social issue that you're trying to solve, there's always people who will be against that social issue. And there are many people here that are all about sustainability and climate change, especially my best friend here, Miriam. And I'm not very aware of that. So I knew that it was very important for me to bring somebody who is aware of that into the campaign so that we would be able to do this in a sustainable and long-term manner, because there's no point in us saying we want to combat period poverty, because we want to raise awareness like we usually do on so many social issues, and we want to combat it physically, and we also want to create workshops to do it. And we've been in the process of doing everything. We're just waiting to literally dive into our campaign, but we need to do it in a sustainable manner. And one thing we've learned, we've already donated some money and stuff to sustainable businesses who provide menstrual products. And one thing we've learned from them was that the VAT on sustainable menstrual products is at 9% in Ireland. And that needs to change, because how are we gonna say that if we want to tackle menstrual poverty, there are people who are like, okay, well, it's unsustainable. So when we have sustainable menstrual products now, you're gonna price the VAT up. It's counterproductive, the whole thing. So I feel like that's one main thing that we really want to combat, because both of us studied law, and we really want to be able to bring this percentage down to zero. And as you've been researching, there have been talks on combating this. So do you want to continue?
Of course, yeah. So at the moment in Ireland, Ireland is the only country in the EU where there is 0% tax on period products, single-use period products. So that is a really good thing. But when it comes to reusable period products, unfortunately, there's still a 9% tax rate, which is quite high, because you're saying if a person makes the conscious decision to become more eco-friendly when they menstruate, it's going to cost them more. And that's not how it should be, especially if we are trying to become more sustainable and care for the planet as well. And also another important thing is, when it comes to period poverty, there is so much stigma around menstruation in general, and there is no way that you can address an issue that you're not even comfortable talking about. So for us, the first stage towards addressing this issue was raising awareness and getting more people involved in the conversation, because unless if people talk about it, there is no way we can address it. So that has been one of the focal points of our campaign, as well as making sure that it's sustainable, and STAND really gave us that opportunity.
Thank you so much to both of you. That's incredibly insightful, and I feel like you're already touching on some of the points that we will be discussing today in the panel. And I'm going to move on to our last panelist as well, Anne Holmes, who is a development specialist currently working as the policy lead for global health at the Department of Foreign Affairs, so the DFA. And in this role, Anne is typically responsible for a number of areas, which include the likes of COVID-19 response and pandemic preparedness, sexual and reproductive health and rights, and also Anne has a background in humanitarian response. Anne has also lived and worked for several years in a range of low-income countries, most recently Malawi. So I'm going to allow Anne to introduce a little bit about the work that she does with the DFA.
Hi everybody, good afternoon, and thank you so much to Aisling and to the colleagues at STAND and USI for first of all holding this event, and second of all inviting myself along to speak. I actually forgot to unmute myself. I was just so interested in hearing what everybody else was saying there, and I'm really looking forward to, I don't want to use too much time because I want to hear what everybody else has to say and discuss. Part of the reason for that being because I am actually quite new into this particular role. So I'm a development specialist, and I've been working in the Department of Foreign Affairs, as mentioned already, for 12 years. Before that, I worked with a range of NGOs, including TROCA, including Oxfam, including CRS, and my entire kind of career has been focused on overseas development assistance, so our international cooperation, with a strong emphasis on humanitarian. And in that role, I have worked in places like South Sudan during the conflict, where there's a lot of displacement, and where people really are at the very sharp and extreme edge of poverty and vulnerability, so it's day-to-day survival. So issues like period poverty are even writ more large and much more critical than in those kind of situations. But I mean, it's been very interesting for me in this new role as well to see the prominence and the profile with which this period poverty agenda is here in Ireland. Because to be honest, until I came into this job, I would have just associated it as being an issue and a problem, in hardcore rural poverty areas. But I mean, it is very clear from the research and from the learning that I've been doing in the last couple of months that this is a very real issue in this part of the world as well. So obviously, there's learnings to be made, and there's a shared and a common agenda that it will be really great to address. I think I'm kind of of a couple of, I mean, there's colleagues like Lam on the call who can speak more realistically and relevantly around how real the issues are in a context outside of Ireland. And I was really pleased to see to hear Mariam mention that Ireland is one of the countries, I think is one of the few countries in the European Union that actually has removed, or for historical reasons, we've been able to avoid having the VAT on period products. I'm really, again, excited at this opportunity, because I think in looking at this issue and many other issues, I think Ireland generally often has a story to tell, and we have a recent story to tell in terms of our social transformation, in terms of our economic transformation, our historical, our agriculture, for example. So in the international development context, Ireland, we are, relatively speaking, to some of the other actors that will be out there, we don't bring a huge amount of money to the table, but what we do is we bring very real and recent and relevant lived experience that we can translate and that we can usefully use and offer and share. So I'm very interested to see how the kind of period poverty agenda is evolving in Ireland, and what movements and groups like this very forum are doing, so that we can kind of go, okay, well, we have another interesting story to tell here, and a useful one and an important one that we can usefully share to groups, to similar groups in other countries, like in Malawi, like in Ethiopia, like in many other places that we operate. But I suppose I would also say that I would also be very conscious about not being a one-way traffic flow. This issue is common. Our experiences will be important, will be valuable. But equally, and particularly going back again to the points made by Aisha and Mariam just now, we're in Ireland, we're not doing too well on the environmental side of things. And Abby, you're going to be instrumental in helping resolve that. But in contexts like Malawi, for example, it's either no period products, or you have environmentally friendly period products. So a lot of the investments, say, the embassies will be doing in countries like Malawi is we support and we train groups we provide them with the materials and the equipment, the training and the know-how and the materials to make recyclable or reusable period products. And then in primary schools, for example, we'll help with the construction of hygiene blocks. So basically private areas where girls can go, where they can change and wash, and that they don't actually have to miss out in school. Because I mean, I think it's a helpful way to look at the extent of the problem. If you consider it a problem, is in terms of through education. I mean, it's an easy one to kind of, whose problem is this anyway? Is it, is it just a girl's problem? Is it just a women's problem? I think we really feel that it is, it's society's problem. So it's not necessarily a woman's problem. Granted, on this call, it seems to be, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, people shout, but it does seem to be predominantly she, hers on this call. So which is indicative of, okay, it's a women's problem. But in actual fact, all of the science, all of the evidence is there is when women are excluded because of period poverty. So they're excluded from education, they're excluded from public life, they're excluded from economic life, even cultural life, and the economy, society suffers, but the economy suffers. So there is an economic cost to period poverty. So, if it's a woman or it's a girl's problem in the immediate sense, but in the broader sense, society suffers. So it is everybody's problem. As things generally tend to go, though, it does tend to be down to the person who's experiencing it most immediately to figure out the solution and to champion it. And I think that's what we're doing here today. So, I mean, I'm just really would like to commend everybody. This movement that is ongoing and this process of change that you're facilitating and driving is important. It's vital, and it's of relevance for the individuals who are menstruating and who will benefit from it. But it's equally vital for the broader community and for everybody else who's going to benefit from it. And then the success that we achieve here, hopefully in Ireland on that front, will be something that we would like to export and offer as, a learning experience that we can share elsewhere. I'll pause because I'm going to probably go on a rant and wait and see what the questions are and come back. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for that, Anne. Honestly, it's great to hear some of the intros because you can see a lot of the synergy that comes between period poverty and also addressing plastic-free periods in conjunction together. And so just based off of what some of the speakers have kind of touched on, I might actually direct this question to Lana and Anne, because you actually have some kind of interconnection in what you've kind of already introduced. But you know, in relation to period poverty, what do you as challenges addressing period poverty in the area that you work locally, and how do you feel that that links with the period poverty globally? That's kind of a long-winded question, but I might pass to Lama first and then to Anne afterwards.
Yeah, thank you for this. So I believe the main challenge that we are facing, not only in Lebanon, but all over the world, is that women and girls' issues and needs are not being prioritized nor addressed. We are not considering budgeting for women needs, especially when it comes to sexual and reproductive health and rights. Another thing is about the stigma and around period. We need really to capacitate the girls to stop calling their menstruation by nicknames or using, for example, secret codes. This should be normalized. We should start talking about menstruation and period as if we are talking about any other issue. In addition to that, a special attention needs to be shifted, whether from donors, from the global society. We need to have additional funding to cover menstrual hygiene management. We need to advocate with donors, maybe conduct national campaigns on fighting stigma and changing misconceptions around the period and menstrual hygiene. And of course, on top of that, we need to have a meaningful participation and inclusion of girls and young women, whether in the design, planning, and implementation phase of any intervention related to menstrual hygiene management.
Absolutely, I definitely agree with that, Lama, and I think the point you made on the lack of consideration and prioritization for people who menstruate, and especially those who are young, and the connection between young women and girls, I think that's very important. And the same question for you as well, the challenges addressing period poverty where you work and how this might link to global period poverty.
I was looking at that question earlier and I was thinking that was a really difficult question to answer. Because in low income contexts, I mean, Lama, you've put it really, really well. I mean, it's resources, but it's all wrapped up in the fact that there's global inequity, there's local inequity, and there's gender inequity. So I mean, there's these really big parameters, societal and real parameters that are kind of in the way. But it's just when you take it down to a low income context or a conflict context or a humanitarian context, there is just so much else that is on the agenda. So it's like, okay, it's about meeting your basic needs. It's about getting your food. It's about getting your water. If you're in a conflict zone, it's about being safe. It's about getting access into education. It's about tracing your loved ones. So the challenges are phenomenal. Even if you're not in a humanitarian setting, even if you're in a low income setting like Malawi, again, just going back to my most recent lived experience, not of poverty, of course, I have to state, but working alongside people who do have to face this on a daily basis. So I mean, the agenda is just so crowded. The challenges are so multifaceted and they're so multidimensional that to then go, okay, oh, and by the way, we want to talk about period poverty on top of that. It's really, really, really difficult to get an agenda, to get the spotlight onto this particular agenda. And then that is exacerbated hugely by the fact that there is it's all wrapped up in social stigma as well. You can kind of comfortably enough talk to everybody and people are willing to engage and listen when you're talking about, okay, gender equality in terms of educational access or gender equality in terms of access to health. Of course, not all health, not all sexual reproductive health sides of things. But as soon as you start to bring in kind of period, you immediately lose not just half your audience, because it's not just men are comfortable with it, it's women. We are all very, I mean, Lama, you said it, women use nicknames. So the stigma, understanding the stigma, being able to find a way to navigate and work around it is, I think, it's one of a number of challenges. So there are many. There's a very long list of challenges. I think it's obvious to all of us on this call what they are. In terms of linking it to the global, I think it is, however, as I can't remember who on the call has already said it, the fact that this is, if you are born female, you are going to menstruate. So regardless of whether you're a Kardashian or somebody living in a village or in an IDP camp. So I mean, there is the opportunity, the global opportunity is the kind of the commonality. So, and identifying that and kind of building a movement around that common agenda and helping us all be in the same space, I think is where the opportunity lies. And your very movement is an example of that. So I'm really pleased that I'm really pleased to see it happening. I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to engage with this, and I'm hoping it's going to deliver.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I hope you can still hear me because my Wi-Fi is not like me today. But the next question, I know Aisha and Mary, maybe you could kind of highlight on this point, but in the area of work that you do, I know Abby, you mentioned a lot of the training programs that you're working on, and I know We Crowned Ireland is focused on a lot of empowerment for people and confidence building. So just to kind of touch on that, can you share a moment with us where, there was like a moment that gave you hope, or even a signal of success in your work that gave you hope in what you were doing? It's kind of a tough one, but
I feel like for us, it definitely had to be when we got the Judges' Choice and the People's Choice Award, when we did the Ideas Collective pitches, because it just showed how many people actually want to learn and want to know about it, and we're in agreement, is that a word? In agreement with us doing the workshops in general. So I feel like that would have been our moment of hope. And then another one would probably be
being on this call right now.
Literally. So yeah, and I feel like another one would, even with the point that we had stated earlier about including other people in the conversation of period poverty, like even just looking through some of the hashtags when it comes to Free to Flow, you could see that it wasn't just only speaking about women. We were using the phrase like those who menstruate, and that as well just shows that people are willing to be open-minded enough to learn more and to grow into understanding how this world is changing, and we need to be able to adapt to the changes as well. So yeah, I would say that would be mine.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And Abby, yourself, the same question, a moment or a signal of success that gave you hope in the work that you're doing.
So we run workshops with schools on this topic, and I suppose the hope that I've got really is that it's been a very mixed level of interest within it. I suppose we've had a good level of interest from the local authority perspective, so that's actually a great cause for hope. Local authorities have been very keen to take us on and to support us in reaching out to schools and providing this kind of education and awareness raising. My experience from schools, as Aisling and Madeline will know, has been quite mixed. I have had experiences of actually being stopped mid-workshop and told that it was inappropriate, and actually stopped talking about this. This is to first years who would, the majority of people at this age would be menstruating, or at least be expecting to menstruate shortly, if not already. So that things like that have been startling, and there have been slow uptake of this work, of these workshops. However, then on the other hand, I've come across absolutely amazing schools that have given me cause for hope. In this week, I've given workshops to TY students who have been focusing on period poverty as a big project within their year, and they were took on this workshop as part of that. Last week, I gave a workshop to 150 TY students. And the feedback from the teacher afterwards, it was interesting, because what she said was that initially she could see that some of the students were uncomfortable. This was a topic that weren't used to being talked to about, but then they did get into it, and she heard them chatting amongst themselves as the class was wrapping up, you know, saying, oh, what are you going to try, which one of these, you know. And so I suppose I do feel that there is cause for hope, because this is now becoming a discussion within this country, and you know, change takes time. And at this time, you know, here we are, we're opening the conversation, we're reaching out to schools, we're offering them these workshops, where it's in the ether now, this conversation, and you know, it'll take time for these changes to really come in, you know, but I think we're moving in positive steps. And on a more kind of EU level, you know, I just heard this week that in Strasbourg, the local authority is offering vouchers of €30 per person towards buying a reusable menstrual items, you know. So there's lots of these little things happening, and I think that over time we'll come together and the change will happen. So yeah, I'm hopeful.
No, that's incredible. I really do agree on the point of conversation. I think it's hugely important, and it's becoming a thing where it's now being more open to discuss here, and it's incredible to see that kind of shift across, you know, different places. And on the topic of conversation, I actually will jump to the questions in the chat briefly, because I think it's two that directly link with each other, so they're more or less the same thing. So I'm going to just read it out, and then, you know, pose it to the panelists. But this question is relating to engaging people into conversation. So it says, what do you think is the best way for engaging people who don't menstruate in this conversation and in the fight for period justice? As Anne said, maybe immediately it's a women's issue, but it affects everyone. So how do we ensure that we're not fighting alone? And I think what I'll do is I'll go to Lama first, because Lama, you know, you mentioned the lack of prioritization when it comes to, you know, people who menstruate. And then I actually will ask this question again to Miriam and Aisha as well, because you also touched on this point too briefly, and we might even spread it along to the other panels too. But yeah, I'll start with Lama first.
Yeah, so actually I believe that fighting for period justice is so much like fighting for gender equality. They are the same. We need to have allies. Everyone in the society should have a role and should be engaged in a way or another. Our project or our intervention, or even if we are to open any discussion, every member of the society should be engaged. The national organization, the international organization, the community at large. Maybe, for example, in our Arab region and Middle East, we have the community leaders that we are involving them in every intervention we are doing inside the community. We are even taking it to the advocacy level. So I can give an example about a campaign that was tackling period poverty that was widely disseminated on TV and on Twitter. And I can say that we received a very good feedback from everyone. So not only female, but also males. And we can see now more and more male figures are becoming allies and are working with us towards fighting period poverty.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Miriam and Aisha as well on that, you know, on including everyone into the conversation. What would you say? How could you, yes, bring more people into this conversation around period poverty and period justice, those who don't menstruate mainly?
So as Lama said, everyone needs to be involved in the conversation. And one thing I remember, especially just after hearing Abby speaking, is that when I was in primary school, that's when they started to separate us to have these conversations about periods. And then in secondary school as well, they would separate us as well. And now that I think about it, I don't understand why. If we're supposed to allow, give men the opportunity to be comfortable with having these conversations, we can't be segregating them from the conversations from a young age, because from a young age, it's putting into their minds that I should not be talking about this, I should not know about this, even though maybe they didn't know what we were talking about in class. Like, they never got to experience these classes with us. So I'd say that's one way that we could allow men in the future to be involved in these conversations, because as Abby said, change takes time, and hopefully at least if the future generations can be more comfortable with this, at least our kids and our kids' kids and our kids' kids' kids can have a world that actually accepts periods as a norm.
Yeah, no, I was
Thank
wondering
you so much.
just come in on that in response to that. Yeah, so we are offering the workshops to, you know, it's not, we don't want gender segregated workshops, and we are saying this when we're promoting them, when we're contacting schools, you know, we're saying they're open for everybody. It is a barrier though, it's a massive barrier, and I think it's one of the reluctances of schools to take them up, where generally it's all girls schools that are contacting us. We have only done one workshop that has involved boys. The one workshop that was cancelled did have boys, and I think that may have had an impact on the fact that the teacher was concerned about them being uncomfortable. But I think it's really important to continue to offer them to everybody. We can't control who takes them up, but to keep on putting them out there, because automatically you're forming a taboo by segregating people in this. It's like, this topic isn't for you, you're not involved. And you know, when I was growing up, it was always the case, you know, you don't mention this, do you know what I mean? If you've got your period and you're not feeling well, you know, you can't possibly say even to your brothers or your father, you know, why, you know. So I think it'll take time to move past this. I suppose one of the issues, of course, is that the teachers who make the decisions about what the teenagers are accessing in terms of information are of that older generation that have their own inbuilt stigma in there and believe this isn't a topic that boys should be exposed to in any way. So it'll take a while to get through this. And it is a very clear, I'm very much noting the teachers that are actually inviting us in to speak to their students, and is very clearly very young women in their 20s, you know, that are inviting us in to speak. So but yeah, hopefully over time we'll be able to get all of this information out there to anyone regardless of what gender they are, because I feel this is very, very important for removing taboos around the topic.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I really, I think the points that you've all made are very, very much interlinked. It's the connection between, you know, the separating kind of makes this thought process in people's heads think that, you know, this isn't really a conversation for me. So I suppose it's something that's ingrained from a very, very young age that develops as we grow older, and then all of a sudden these conversations don't seem to be had with one another. And so I think the points you raised are all incredible. And actually this next question is, I think, for Anne mainly, but before we move on, Anne, I don't know if you had any points you want to make on the last question we just asked as well.
Yeah, just actually a very quick point just on the last question. I didn't even read the next one, sorry. It's just in terms of finding ways to engage men in the conversation, or people who don't menstruate. I think there's useful lessons to be learned from the whole the broader conversation around about gender-based violence and engaging men in gender-based violence. I think, and I really like the way, Abby, you phrased it in terms of, you know, we are creating taboos by separating out the conversation. I think my experience of working on the gender-based violence agenda to some extent has been around we'll get nowhere if we don't involve men in the conversation. You know, it's not that we're doomed to fail, but we won't get as far as we really should get, and we won't get there fast enough. But I think it's really important that we just kind of, in our own mindset, that we don't set ourselves up as a them and us, and that we're combative with men on this. You know, we have found it most successful on the gender-based violence agenda when we kind of give men the benefit of the doubt and allow them the space that they can actually come in, because many of them, many more than you expect, will actually want to have the conversation, possibly not necessarily about periods, but, you know, that men are brothers, men are fathers, they will want to know how this relates to their daughter. So, you know, they will want to be able to have a conversation without squirming. They will want to be able to go down to Lidl to buy whatever it is that they need to buy for the daughter without it being a completely horrifying situation. So it's almost like, you know, give them the benefit of the doubt and allow them into the conversation, invite them into the conversation rather than challenge them into the conversation, is an approach that in the gender-based violence sphere is also quite effective, because it's a different theme, but it's like, the accepted societal behavior of men in this environment, which you are being cultured and nurtured into, is also damaging your sister who you love deeply, or or is going to affect your daughters. And that is a really effective and often very welcome opening of a door. So I mean, the onus, I guess, will remain on us to open the door, but to do so in a manner that it is that they will want to come in rather than be afraid to come in the door, if you get my point. And then, Bookie, did you want me to go on to a question in the chat, which I will now just read?
I can read it out for you here so that everyone can hear. Thank you so much for that point as well, and using that perspective is incredible, of the perspectives that has been put on women and people who menstruate initially in the conversation, that we almost nearly don't have room because we've been taught to not give room. So I think that's incredibly important to highlight that. A change in mindset is great. So I'm going to move into the next question and we'll probably take one more question after that and we'll finish up. So this question is, how can we ensure that communities are proactive in issues of menstrual poverty, and that there are exiting strategies, or I think it's exciting strategies in place to ensure sustainability of these menstrual projects, more especially in Malawi? I think that would be directed for you, Anne, in that case, or anyone else.
That's a tough question. I guess it's two questions really, isn't it? So how to ensure that communities are proactive in issues of it's similar, isn't it? I mean, you need to create the space for people to be kind of able to talk about it comfortably. I mean, in places like Malawi in particular, there are parts of the country which are exceptionally conservative. Child marriage is a huge issue. COVID, the pandemic, has had a massive knock-on effect on child marriage and teen pregnancies. So it's kind of expected, you either, if you're not in school, you're going to go out and get married, or be married, whether you have much of a say in it or not. So I'm just kind of mentioning that to illustrate the kind of the conservative nature and expectations in places like Malawi and other countries as well, where basically as soon as you menstruate, that is, that's the trigger for your initiation, and then you're now no longer ready or suitable for school or economic life. You're suitable only as a potential spouse and childbearer. I mean, that's not absolutely across the board, but that does still exist to an extent that we would prefer not to see it. So then how do you, in that kind of context, how do you get communities proactively involved? It's through champions. It's through finding people who are comfortable, who have lived that experience. So it's not, you're not going to get anywhere if you have kind of a middle-aged white woman from Ireland going out into a village in rural Africa. I'm not going to be the one who's going to go in and kind of go, oh, by the way, did you know? If only you knew. I mean, that's not the model at all. It's about identifying what already means of change, who are the change makers in these communities already? Do they need your support? Would they like your support? And allowing them to come to you, or just making yourself known that if you wanted to come to us to have a conversation, we're going to be in a position to support you. It really has to be driven from within the community, and every community will have, leaders. They will have change makers. They will have people with inspirational, with a different aspiration. In Malawi, there's a traditional chief arrangement. And there's a chief in one particular area where ourselves, the embassy, but also organisations like Throat and Concern, who are familiar to many, have been working for several years. And there's a chief there called Chief T.A. Kitchendemota, which means hot as fire, or hot from the fire, something along those lines. And she has been absolutely a dynamo. She has been hugely influential in terms of ending child marriage, pulling children back who have been married off and bringing them back into their village and putting them back into school. So, she has been the one who kind of comes knocking on the door, and she's the one who brings the others in. So, but it's coming from her, and that is what makes it sustainable, because if we back away, she's going to keep carrying on. So the change needs to come from within. It needs to be driven from within. External actors like ourselves, we can come in and we can support it, but we don't set the agenda. We don't drive the agenda. We facilitate change that is already there. So it's really important in these conversations to understand who wants to see the change, and to support and engage with them. Hopefully that gives you some sense of an answer. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And just our last question before we close, I might just open this to the panel floor. So the last question here is, how can we take action on a global level to support period justice? Any of the panelists can jump in, I don't mind, or if you'd like, I can go first.
Yeah, is it okay if I take this?
Yeah, absolutely.
I just think the main issue, especially with menstrual poverty, of course, it all comes down to people not being in a financial position to afford what they need. And to even begin with, women have no control over, like, this is a biological and natural thing that happens to us. And I think it is wrong to make people have to pay for these things, because it's not a choice. Everyone, even people that change their gender, still menstruate. So I think, of course, on a global scale, when it comes to menstrual poverty, the best way to address it would be to make sure that everyone, regardless of their financial status, would be able to access these products. It shouldn't be a luxury or a privilege.
Yeah, so I guess the best way to conclude that is women should be allowed, women deserve the right to choose how they want to menstruate. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I don't know if any other panelists would like to come in on that point as well. Okay, I think we can then conclude the panel discussion. I'd like to thank everyone who put in questions in the chat box, and thank every one of our panel guests who answered the questions. I might actually pass over back to our host, who can finish off today with some of the incredible actions you can get involved in with our Free the Flow campaign. So Gurmila Maghrib, thank you all so much.
Hello, everyone. Yes, I don't know about you, but I'm absolutely buzzing. It is truly such an honor to be amongst all of our panelists here, as well as our audience members. So on behalf of USI STAND program and the 10,000 Students Initiative, I'd like to say thank you to everyone here today for sharing your expertise, your experience, to Buki for graciously moderating. It's important to remember that by speaking out about period poverty and its many challenges, we are taking the first step right now towards addressing this global issue. Again, I'd like to really say thank you to everyone who participated as audience members today. Love seeing that participation, getting questions from everyone. And I strongly encourage you all to take the pledge to Free the Flow. There should be a link in the chat there for you now from Madeline. And so once you click on that link, once you take that pledge, you will receive an action pack that's going to give you lots of little ways beyond this panel to start to take action to address all of these issues. I'd very much appreciate any feedback that you have on this panel event so that we can continue to bring you engaging and illuminating opportunities to work for positive change together in our world. So do please let us know about your experience by clicking the link that should be in the chat there now as well. That's just a very short survey. Okay, so that's all for now. Many thanks again to all, and I hope to see you soon.